Friends, we've been covering St. Augustine, and we talked on Monday about the problem of evil, and we talked about how it's possible for a God who is omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent, that is, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all good, to exist when there is evil in the universe. Okay, and the reality is that there's certainly evil in our universe, at least that does appear to be the case. And the problem of evil is if God is all-powerful, that is, he could change the evil if he wanted to, and God is all-knowing, he knows about the evil, and God is all good, so presumably he doesn't want the evil around, then how is it that the evil is still there? And Augustine's explanation is that the answer is free will. The answer is that God considers free will to be such a great good, of such great importance, that it justifies a universe in which evil is allowed to be present. Now, for Augustine, free will is kind of the centerpiece of much of human meaningfulness and the human existence. That is, it provides us with the special something that gives us status as human beings. God could make automatons, God could make robots, but he chooses not to, because God thinks that a universe in which human beings have freedom and can freely choose for or against him, or for or against anything for that matter, is better than a universe in which you just have automatons or robots. Today we're moving to some related topics. As I've mentioned before, this text is an autobiographical work at its center, and so what we're doing is we're extracting philosophy from it. It's not necessarily something where the philosophy is central to the text. It's more like the philosophy is present here and there, and it's easy to extract from the text. I'm looking here in book 3 today, and I'm looking in chapter 8. Okay, and I'm going to extract from this discussion that's really important in Augustinian studies and was very influential down through the centuries. I'm looking for some text. Yarth, where is your text? You left it at home. Okay. Do we have texts? Nobody has their text? Kenneth, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, you guys bring your texts, okay? All right. Have it online, okay. Have it online, okay. Thank you. All right, you have it too? Okay. It is an open domain book, so it's something that's easily accessible online for sure. Okay, I'm reading in chapter 8 on my page 87, second paragraph in the chapter. Augustine writes there, "But when God commands something contrary to the customs or laws of a people, it must be done, even if it has never been done before. If it has been neglected, it must be restored, and if it has never been established, it must be established. It is lawful for a king to command within the city over which he rules something that neither he nor any predecessor had ever ordered. And if it is not against social principles, for him to be obeyed, or rather, if it be against the principles of society, for him not to be obeyed, for it is a general law of human society for men to obey their rulers, how much more must God, ruler of all creation, be obeyed without hesitation in whatever he imposes upon it? Just as among the authorities in human society, the greater authority is set above the lesser in the order of obedience, so God stands above all others." Okay, now that seems at first blush to be pretty innocuous kind of a passage, but it's actually been very influential. This is a really important passage, and I'll tell you guys a little bit why. Okay, what Augustine is arguing there is that there are two kinds of codes of conduct, okay, two codes of human conduct. There is, first of all, the positive law. I'll explain that momentarily. And then there's, secondly, the natural law. The positive law is the law of the land. That's like the law of the state of Texas. So Texas has certain laws on the books. They include laws against taking innocent human life, laws against tax evasion, laws against shoplifting, laws that require us to drive on the right-hand side of the road or to abide by traffic signals, to stop at the lights, etc. Okay, and the positive law, or the law of the land, is a very visible kind of code of conduct. But Augustine is also saying that there is actually at the same time a second code of conduct, which is invisible, but which he considers to be more important and more fundamental than the positive law, or the law of the land. The second code of conduct is the natural law. The natural law for Augustine is that moral sense, or conscience, that God has given to all human beings. By consulting our minds, we can recognize its presence, and it tells us what is right and what is wrong. The natural law is an invisible code of moral conduct, but it is actually more fundamental and primary, whereas the positive law, or the law of the land, is secondary. Let me explain a little bit about what Augustine means here in terms of three different sections of this diagram. Positive law is legitimate as law for Augustine insofar as it reflects the underlying natural law. So positive law is derived from the natural law. It takes its meaningfulness and power and legitimacy as a code of conduct from the underlying natural law which precedes it. And most positive laws actually are functions of the underlying natural law. I'm speaking here about things in the second segment here. And although the second segment may be smaller in the diagram, it's actually the biggest segment because most positive laws reflect the underlying natural law. Sometimes they reflect the underlying natural law directly. The underlying natural law tells us it is wrong to take innocent human life. The positive law, or the law of the land, makes that explicit, and it carves it out and targets it to particular situations. It might say, you can take human life in warfare. It's legitimate or acceptable to kill people in warfare because that doesn't count as an innocent person. That's a person who's trying to kill you. Okay, or maybe it might say you can take human life out of self-defense because someone there is trying to harm you, and so you can harm them in return. Those are ways of making the underlying principle of not taking human life a little bit more concrete and tangible, hemming it about with particular kinds of qualifications. But the laws of the state of Texas that forbid the taking of innocent human life derive their legitimacy from an underlying natural law for Augustine, which is primary. It is the moral principle that precedes the laws of the land. Some laws of the land, some positive laws, directly reflect the natural law, like what I just mentioned, laws against the taking of innocent human life. But other positive laws indirectly reflect the natural law. They don't immediately, directly model it, but they indirectly reflect it. Many of the laws in the state of Texas are just logistical laws. So, for instance, drive on the right-hand side of the road. It's completely arbitrary. There are many countries where they drive on the left-hand side of the road. And whenever you're in England, they have on all the sidewalks arrows as you step off into the crosswalk saying, look left, right? Oh, I'm sorry. No, you look right. I missed it. Look right. Because the traffic is coming from the other direction, and I guess the Americans all get clobbered as they walk off the sidewalks in England, right? Because they drive on the left-hand side of the road. It's not just England, Japan, South Africa, Australia. There are a bunch of places in the world where they drive on the left-hand side of the road. Okay, we stop at stoplights. In Europe, they have roundabouts, not stoplights. And Americans have no idea how to navigate roundabouts. Okay, there's one principle for navigating a roundabout. The right-of-way is always given to the person in the roundabout. If you just remember that and everybody else has to yield, you're good. But Americans can't seem to remember that. Okay, these are arbitrary logistical kinds of laws. It's totally arbitrary to say everybody's got to drive on the right-hand side of the road, or everybody's got to stop at the stoplight. That's totally arbitrary. It's logistical law. But Augustine would say it is a law that nevertheless indirectly reflects an underlying natural law principle. That is, it indirectly reflects an underlying principle that is fundamental to human existence, that has been given to human beings by God to help us flourish, to help us navigate life and to flourish successfully. What is the underlying principle? Well, probably we all drive on the right-hand side of the road so we don't kill each other. I mean, right? So there's not chaos and, a bunch of innocents don't die. So it is like actually important and reflects, although indirectly, an underlying natural law. Okay, those are examples of positive laws that directly and indirectly reflect the underlying natural law. Okay, now I'll pause for questions in just a minute, but let me put a couple more things on the table here. Sometimes you can find rules or principles of personal conduct here in segment 3 that are in the natural law but that are not reflected in the positive law. Take lying as an example. Augustine thinks we know lying to be wrong. Okay, and if we have properly formed consciences, we feel it to be wrong when we do it. But most forms of lying are actually not reflected in the positive law. They're not forbidden by the law of the land. Only specific kinds of lying, like perjury under oath, are forbidden by the law of the land. Most forms of lying are just innocuous forms of lying that are not punished, or I guess no lie is innocuous, but they're not punished by the law. I was reading a study one time. The average amount that Americans lie each day is about 5 to 7 times. After reading that study, I thought, wow, I need to lie more often. I'm not lying enough. Okay. Anyway, 5 to 7 times. That's like a lot. Probably most of that is just sort of like social positioning lies. You just lie so you look better in somebody else's eyes or something like that. So they think a little more of you or something. Okay. That's not punished by the law. Okay, not punished. But it's in the natural law. And we know it to be wrong, Augustine says. It violates the underlying natural law principle, even though the law of the land does not punish versions of it. We could vary the example. Let me mention one other example of something that might be that is in the natural law for Augustine, but that isn't necessarily reflected in the law of the land. Adultery. Okay, so Augustine thinks we know adultery to be wrong. It's important to be faithful to one's spouse. The law of the land, that is, the laws of the state of Texas, do not forbid it. In some countries, it's actually prohibited and you can be punished. If we were in Afghanistan, for instance, adulterers would be stoned. Okay, I think adultery is illegal in the military, and you get punished for it, I believe. I think they can't allow any hanky-panky in the military, so they punish people for that. But in most American society, it's not reflected in the positive law. It's an example of something that is in the natural law, but not in the positive law. Okay, it's here in segment 3. The really juicy and interesting things are here in segment 1. Okay, and let me lecture on that for just a minute, and then I'll throw it open for questions. Sometimes you get laws that are passed, even legitimately passed in particular countries or states, that do not reflect the underlying natural law. Okay, and these are really interesting because Augustine considers them to be no law at all. The positive law is not legitimate as law unless it reflects in some way, directly or indirectly, the underlying natural law. Let me offer you guys some examples. Have most of us read Martin Luther King Jr.'s Birmingham jail letter? 1, 2, 3. I thought that was like read all over in high schools these days. Okay. All right, some of us haven't read it. All right, MLK is a very famous activist. He wasn't really a theoretician or a thinker. He was more of an activist dude. But the Birmingham jail letter is famous because he wrote it in response to some sympathetic critics. Okay, and so if you're not up on the history, what was going on in the 1960s in the United States was a period of great civil unrest. And all across the American South, including in Houston, there were segregation laws in place. And these laws prevented white people and black people from using the same facilities. They were to be segregated. Okay, so different water fountains, different bathrooms, different portions of the bus, different lines at the bank, stuff like that. Okay. And MLK was leading a campaign against segregation laws in favor of integration. They even had schooling. Schooling was segregated. Okay, white kids and black kids didn't go to school together. MLK led a campaign against segregation laws, saying that what is going on in practice is these laws are being used to keep black people down. They're being used to create an unequal society where African Americans don't have access to the same kinds of opportunities and resources that others have. Okay, and MLK, he advocated these tactics of civil unrest. Okay, where he and his followers would lie out in the street to prevent the buses from going through, or camp out in front of the banks so people couldn't get into the bank. They didn't practice violence. You know, God be praised, MLK saved this country from probably a civil war in the 1960s. So he was an opponent of violence. But they were kind of passive-aggressive sorts of tactics. Okay, it was sort of like, you know, is designed to create tension and to get under the skin of other people, to force them to confront the injustice of the segregation ordinances, okay, as MLK saw it. And so MLK was criticized by some sympathetic critics who agreed with him that segregated facilities were unequal and therefore unjust. But they disagreed with his tactics. They believed that he was leading to, his tactics were bringing about civil unrest in society and undermining the social order, which they were. Okay, and MLK penned the Birmingham jail letter in response. And in the Birmingham jail letter, he cites Augustine, and he knew his Augustine really well and cites Augustine extensively. He also cites Aquinas, but he cites Augustine and he says, look, there are two laws. There's a positive law and then there's a natural law. And the positive law, the law of the land, is legitimate as law insofar as it reflects the underlying natural law. And if it does not reflect the underlying natural law, it is no law at all. It is an unjust law and therefore no law at all and not deserving of being obeyed. Now think about that for just a minute. That's a really strong sort of a statement, isn't it? Kind of a scary statement too. Think of the abuses that could be brought about as a result of that statement. Okay, so suppose I'm walking through the Galleria and I think to myself, there are laws against shoplifting. But I don't think that that's just. So I'm going to shoplift today because, you know, a positive law, if it doesn't reflect the underlying natural law, is no law at all. And I'm the interpreter of the natural law. Each person interprets the natural law, right? So why don't I just shoplift from Nordstrom's? That's like really scary to say that the law of the land is not something that's deserving of being obeyed. It's a scary precedent. And so MLK lays out some potential safeguards to keep the slippery slope problem from happening and to keep the interpretation of the law of the land from descending into individualistic chaos. Okay, and Augustine has certain safeguards as well. But the point is just that the argument in the Birmingham jail letter is deeply, deeply Augustinian. It comes right out of Augustine. And the idea is just that laws that are written in the state of Texas or in the United States or in any country for that matter are only legitimate insofar as they reflect another primary non-codified code of conduct. I could give you guys a couple of other examples here. Let me give you one other example at least. In the 1850s, prior to the American Civil War, the American Civil War starts in 1861. In the 1850s, in the antebellum era prior to the war, a legislative act called the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Slaves were considered property at the time. And property, if found apart from its master, was to be returned to the master. Okay, and people were required or obligated by the Fugitive Slave Act, if they found a runaway slave, to turn that slave into the local authorities so that the local authorities could take that slave, the property, back to the master, back to its master, his or her. And this law went into effect as the law of the land, and there was widespread civil disobedience because a bunch of people rightly recognized that this law did not manifest justice. It was a law that undermined human dignity and respect. It was a law that treated people like property, and a lot of people in the United States refused to obey it, so there's widespread civil disobedience. That's an example, I would say, of a law of the land that is legitimately passed that doesn't reflect the underlying natural law. We could cite some other examples. The Nuremberg laws in Germany in the 1930s, National Socialist Germany, Nuremberg laws, which forbade people from shopping at Jewish shops or intermarrying with Jews. You could cite a lot of other examples in history. But sometimes laws are listed explicitly in the positive law as laws of the land that do not reflect the underlying natural law. And for Augustine, they are not legitimate, and for others following Augustine, like MLK, they are not legitimate either and should not be obeyed, which is a very scary thing to say, actually. It's a very dangerous thing to say. Okay, let me stop, and I've been talking for a little while, so let me stop and ask if there are questions, comments, or reflections about some of these ideas. Yes? No, it's just there. Most positive laws reflect the underlying natural law. So it's just that part of the positive law that overlaps with the underlying natural law. More interesting than that, from Augustine's perspective, are things here in 1 and 3. Yeah. Good. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think Augustine believes that natural law will be across the board for all religions, since it's based on God's innate moral standards?
Yes. So he did. So Augustine's view on that is as follows. He thinks that all peoples everywhere have been given a moral sense, whether they are Christian or not. Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, heck, Rastafarian, right? They all know basic principles of right or wrong. Those principles might include things like don't cheat on your business contracts, or don't lie to your neighbor. Don't steal from others. Don't destroy the earth. Don't destroy the property of others. Don't kill innocent people. Those might be the kinds of principles that are in the natural law. But Augustine thinks that all people have received it. All peoples have received it. For that reason, he thinks that you can be a good person if you follow the natural law. You can be a good person without being a Christian. You don't have to be a Christian to be a good person. Now, there's certain things that you can't do without being a Christian. Like, for instance, obtain eternal life or experience the flourishing that comes from the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit, or do a variety of other things, right? But you can be, morally speaking, a good person if you follow the dictates of your conscience and the natural law that has been given to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about a religion like Islam that believes murder is justifiable in some cases?
Sure.
What about that?
Yeah, that's a great comment. So I assume we're referring here to jihadi martyrs who believe that they will enter paradise if they are able to kill infidels in the name of Allah and to advance the cause of jihad by doing so. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. That's a great comment. It opens up a big can of worms. So let me delve into that can of worms for about 5 minutes, if it's all right with you guys. And I think that it will take that long to actually answer this question. Sometimes in life and in history, we encounter cultures that are really, really different from our own. And in these cultures, sometimes the practices of the peoples are so different from our own as to be almost unrecognizable. And in fact, actually are like horrifying to us. So let me give you an example. I'm not going to use the jihadi martyrs. No one's Muslim in the room, yes? Is that correct? What are our religious backgrounds? Protestant, Christian, Catholic, non-denominational, Catholic, Christian, Baptist? Okay, so we're all Christian, a Christian background of some sort. Okay, cool. You guys are very typical Houstonians and Americans. That's all right. That's I am too, so I'm from Fort Worth, but very similar backgrounds to all of us in the room. Suppose we were to encounter someone from a culture very, very different from our own, historically speaking. Let's take just randomly pre-Columbian Mesoamerican culture. Okay, so pre-Columbian peoples in Mexico and Central America, the Aztecs, the Maya, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, they practiced human sacrifice. A lot of human sacrifice. Hundreds of thousands of victims every year. It was believed that the sacrifices appeased the moon god, sun god, the rain god. They had elaborate rituals, right? The top of the Temple of the Moon in Teotihuacan near Mexico City. The priest would carve out the heart of the victim, hold the heart up to heaven, squeeze the heart, the blood would run down the steps, and the summer solstice would arrive. Okay. Now imagine, like, historically, some Aztec warrior, suppose he were to be transported to our own time, and he appeared before us in class, okay, and he said, we have in our culture centuries of tradition of human sacrifice, sacrificing men, women, and children, innocent, it doesn't matter. And we do this because we have deep, long-standing justifications for this in our culture. We believe that it appeases the sun god, the rain god, moon god. And for us, this is what is right. Okay, in other words, for us, we consider human sacrifice to be morally correct, morally justifiable. And what if this Aztec warrior were to finish his speech by saying, and who are you to judge our culture and our peoples and our practices? What's right for us is right, and what's right for you is right for you. What's right for us is right for us, what's right for you is right for you. What would you say in response to somebody like that? Anybody have a response that you could give him? You have a comment, okay, that's a start. Are the people? No. These people were not okay. They would be dragged kicking and screaming to the tops of these temples where their hearts would be carved out. They were like bound and they'd be gagged and then they'd like be carved up. It was awful. Yeah. Right. At the time, they believed that they were going to hell. So the Aztecs believed that by sacrificing them, the sun god would send the souls of the people to hell, and somehow in the process of going to hell, their souls would like appease the gods. So the sun god would become happy from the blood received from the souls going down to hell. Yes, that was the thought. I know, it's like awful. And many of these people were just, stink, I left my hanky in my apartment, or in my office. Many of these people were victims captured in war, so their villages would be burned, they'd be taken. Innocents, they weren't necessarily even involved in any of the fighting. They didn't necessarily want to have anything to do with the war. They just happened to be victims. So yeah, I mean, it's like really bad. If there is ever any practice in human history going back, like Aztec sacrifices look pretty bad. It's about as bad as it can get. But what if the Aztec warrior were to say, who are you to judge us? What's right for us is right for us, and what's right for you is right for you. Yes. Oh, another comment. Okay. We don't want to answer the main question. Right. So I think the Spanish and Portuguese soldiers in Central America, I think they were going after gold and land and subjugation of peoples. I don't think they gave a rip about what those peoples were. Were they also simultaneously acting as God's judgment upon the peoples of Mesoamerica who practiced horrendous human sacrifice practices? Yeah, kind of. I mean, sometimes I think that, like, I'm a Christian, I think that if the sins of a people get so big, so great, and there's nobody immediately around on the inside of their countries to destroy the system and to replace it with something more upright and conditional, or something that's more conducive to human flourishing, I think God will enlist peoples from elsewhere to go in and basically be, an arm of justice. I hesitate to say that because it is a war of conquest that the Spaniards are doing in Mexico. It's not as though they are going on a humanitarian mission to save the victims. So maybe best would be to condemn both sides and to say, look, Spaniards are like out of bounds. They're, lust for gold and like destruction of the local peoples and all that. But like the Aztecs are way out of bounds too, because like they were awful. The Aztecs were horrible. So I guess that would be my stance there. Do you have a comment? Oh, you're going to respond to him. Okay, he says, okay, who are you to judge us? What would you say? Because it's right in their culture? Okay. Okay. Oh, no, don't go down that line, really? It's like, it's okay for them to sacrifice the women and children?
You can't do anything, they're going to sacrifice you also.
Oh, yeah. I'm not saying you necessarily have to be able to do anything in practice. I'm just saying, can we morally condemn the Aztec warrior and say, you're wrong? Is there an objective standard, like a natural law that he's violated or something like that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so you would condemn him? Okay, okay. All right. It's bad to kill people, it's bad to pillage. Okay, that's a start. But what if he like doubles down and he says, we have strong historical precedent for this. Sun god needs sacrifices. Moon god too. We feel it to be right. Our culture is just as good as yours. Who do you think you are to be superior and all high and mighty over and against us and to say that you're better than us and can condemn us for what we do? I'm trying to make the case as strong as possible. Okay. I hope we would not be convinced by that speech of his. I hope. I trust. Okay. How can you judge the Aztec warrior? Or can you judge the Aztec warrior? Okay. Oh, no, many of the people they're sacrificing hadn't done any wrong. Most of the people that... That's right, yeah. That's that Mel Gibson movie, right? Yeah, but no, Apocalypto, if I remember correctly, I saw a little bit of it. It's about smaller settlements in Guatemala and so forth, right? Or is it?
I don't remember. I just know
Okay.
that they like take this guy, like, okay, the guy, like, okay, they like pillage his village, and then this guy has his wife, and his wife is pregnant, and he has a kid, right? And so, like, the Aztecs, I don't know, it was either the Incas, the Aztecs.
I think it was the Maya. I think it was the Maya.
They like pillage the village, and like they kill like basically everybody with like no reason. They just like infiltrate, and then like the main character, he kills his wife and his kid to like hide in like a hole or whatever. And then they take everybody and they sacrifice them. And then like the end of the movie ends with like the Spanish explorers coming in or whatever. And it's like
Yeah. Kind of powerful that way. But yeah, so the sacrifices that take place in Teotihuacan. Is anybody from the federal district or near the or has family? Have you gone down to El Distrito Federal? No? Okay. So in Teotihuacan, which is like the ancient city, right? You can go see the pyramids. Like they literally had thousands of people lined up, and it was just like kill, 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 kill. So it was really bad. But guys, it's the same principle here at stake as might be at stake if some antebellum American South plantation owner were to come to us and say, look, we have strong precedent for slavery in our culture. And what's right for us is right for us, because that's our culture. And what's right for you may be right for you, and maybe slavery is not right for you in your culture. That's okay, but it's right for us. And we're okay, because like that's what we do. It's the same principle at stake here, guys. Can you condemn such people? Can you condemn them and say they are morally wrong? Yes! Yes, you can. Yes, you must be able to. If we cannot condemn such people, if the answer here is like cultural relativism to such an extent that people like that can be morally right, and it's not possible for us to judge them or to say that they're wrong, then I lose my bearings as a human being, honestly. Like, I don't know what's going on at that point. Because I don't know which way is up. Is that a hand? Yeah. Yeah, the southern plantation owners referenced biblical passages as like historical precedent to support their own slavery system. Yeah, that was for sure a part of the whole cultural precedent backstory that they told. Yeah. Good. So Augustine's explanation is just this. As we've talked about before in class, Augustine thinks that all human beings are afflicted with a disease. That disease is sin. Okay, a sinful condition. That's just what human beings have and are until God rescues us. Individual human beings are afflicted with sin, and when human beings get together in groups or cultures, whole groups or cultures can sin together and can fall into sin. So there may be great historical precedent for the Aztec warrior or for the jihadi who wants to kill a bunch of innocents. There may be great historical precedent for the plantation owner who enslaves the Africans. But that does not make what they are doing necessarily right. Rather, what Augustine would say is what it reflects is that they are sinning as a group. Whole cultures can go astray and can sin as a group. And Augustine would certainly not be a cultural relativist. He believed in natural law, and he believed that it is possible to condemn people in certain cultures and to, cast moral judgment upon them and to say to them, what you are doing is wrong, because there is an underlying natural law that all human beings can and ought to be aware of. And when we violate that natural law, we are violating a common body of moral principles that all human beings have access to. Now, one thing that I want to clarify here, this is kind of a long response to the question, I guess. One thing I want to clarify here is that this does not mean that all human beings always, at all times, know themselves to be violating the natural law. It is possible to dull your conscience so much that you do not know what is truly right. Okay, I remember reading some years ago an interview with a serial killer named Ted Bundy. He killed like 28 young women, okay? He would abduct them, rape them, and then kill them. Okay, and it was an interview that happened shortly before he was executed. And he said in the interview, it's something that was really profound. He said, after a certain amount of time and doing this, you stop realizing that it's wrong. And it actually starts to feel right to do this. And I remember reading that sentence and thinking, that's really scary. So if we do wrong enough, then it dulls our conscience to the point where we don't know it's wrong. Right? Maybe you have fallen into an addiction or a habit where you've done it so much that you've kind of lost track of things, and it feels right, or it feels so good that it just feels like something you should always do. Okay, it happens to people. Okay, and it can happen to cultures too. Okay, so entire cultures can sin so much and be so deep into sin that the slavery feels right to them, the human sacrifices feel right to them, and the sin blinds them to the natural law. The sinful condition undermines their ability to know what is right and what is wrong. Okay, questions or comments, reflections? Yes?
What would his example be? Because I don't think they knew about the I don't know.
Oh, about the Maya? He didn't? Yeah. What would his own example have been? All of the writers back at that time, they always referenced the Canaanites as being like the worst of the worst. So remember in the book of Exodus, right, the Israelites come out of Egypt and they slaughter the Canaanites. And if you read the accounts, it's clear that from the biblical text, they appear to be slaughtering the Canaanites in large part because, well, God tells them to, but in large part because the Canaanites are really bad. They practice genocide. So they're killing they kill the babies, is what they're doing. They burn the babies alive is what they would do. Okay, they put the babies on altars, several of the babies together, and they just light a match and burn them. So basically, writers back in Augustine's day always referenced the Canaanites as the worst of the worst. They would also eat the babies afterwards. So baby flesh, I guess, was a delicacy. Why are we talking about this? Anyway, it was it's really bad. Okay, so questions or comments? Good. Yes, so he thinks God is the origin, There have been other natural law theorists in history who are non-theists. So many natural law theorists in history have said, as Augustine says, the place where we get this moral sense from is God. God gives us the moral sense. Okay. But there are other natural law theorists who say the natural law is just built into the universe, built into the nature of things. So they're the non-theists who say it's just part of the fabric of our surroundings. And there's a second part to your question?
Well, it's like, I don't want to use this example, like North Korea, how they're so far gone, they're not being taught natural law.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see. So what about the 14-year-old kid who's been in the Hitler Youth for the last 10 years and who is, like, he doesn't know that the Nazis are wrong? Okay. What about the brainwashed kid? Okay, great question. So if we grow up in normal circumstances, our consciences are formed by our surroundings, and presumably there is enough of the light of the natural law accessible to us for us to embrace it if we so choose. Right? That's present in almost all cultures. There are some cultures that are so far gone that it's not possible to access the light of the natural law as you grow up in education circles. And that's a really hard issue, the issue of the brainwashed Hitler kid. Is he wrong if his conscience tells him it's right to kill Jews? Because he's like so thoroughly brainwashed. You guys have all read Huckleberry Finn, yes? Or know about Mark Twain's book Huckleberry Finn? In Huckleberry Finn, Huck is helping Jim, the slave, escape on the Mississippi River. And there's this key passage where Huck thinks he's going to hell because he is stealing property. His conscience has been formed to, like, so thoroughly formed by this wrong system that he believes he's going to go to hell for helping Jim escape. And at the end of the passage, he says, well, I guess I'll just go to hell then. It's like this, wow, really moving moment in the book. We're at time, so let me give you just like a 20-second response here, and then I guess I'll have to save it for next time. The existence of people who are thoroughly brainwashed like the jihadi or the Hitler Youth kid does not demonstrate the non-existence of the natural law. It does demonstrate that it is important to cultivate the consciences of human beings in a careful way with broad attention to a variety of inputs so that they have access to deeper principles than just the opinions of the peoples of their time. Okay, that's one of the reasons why Augustine thinks it's important to study history, so we can know what other people's thought, and so we're not just confined to our own circumstances. Augustine thinks that also, as a theist, he thinks that if you truly, sincerely are seeking God, he thinks that pretty much whatever your cultural circumstances, even if you have grown up in North Korea or even if you have grown up in the Hitler Youth, God will make a way for you to find the right path and to come to him. Okay, that's his opinion. Augustine's opinion is if you are truly and sincerely seeking God, then God will make it possible for you to know right from wrong and to find the right path, morally speaking, through life. Okay, I'm not sure if that's correct. I believe in God's justice, so I think God makes it right in the end, whatever your birth circumstances. But it is Augustine's opinion, and he believes that is the outcome that will happen in cases like that. Okay? Good deal.